Hey, it's Roy Newgate, and today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite characters in One Piece, and that is Dracule Mihawk, who initially wasn't even in my top 5, but the more I talked about him, the more he rose higher in my list. And for this video, I wanted to talk about him as a combatant and just how strong he might be. And you know, usually for these sort of videos, the topic usually is centered around the Mihawk versus Shanks debate, which of course, I'm going to touch on that later on in the video, but I don't think that's all there is to it. I don't think that's all there is to Mihawk. He isn't just a rival of Shanks. And he also isn't just a goal for Zoro to reach. You know, he has more purpose than that in the story. In One Piece, I feel like swordsmanship is the most revered combat style. And Mihawk represents that because he is the strongest swordsman. So potentially he might have the greatest accomplishments out of any swordsman to ever live. Now, I mean that from a strictly combative standpoint, not overall accomplishments, because if we were going to talk about greatest accomplishments from a swordsman, then we would have to talk about Roger and him becoming the Pirate King. But becoming the Pirate King, of course, is not inherently a strength feat. You know, it's more than that, much more. And you know, you might say that Haki is the most revered fighting style, but Haki isn't a fighting style. Haki is a fighting tool or a combat tool. To fight with Haki, you have to have some way to use it. Either you use your bare hands and you're a brawler, you use a sword or another bladed weapon and you fight with that, or you use a devil fruit and you use those two together. Actually, I kind of misspoke. Your weapon doesn't have to be a bladed weapon. You know, you could use a kanabo like Kaido and Yamato, or just any weapon in general. And you can use that in combination with a devil fruit. You know, everybody's style is different. Everybody has their preferred way of fighting that may encompass various tools of combat. Now, when I say swordsmanship is the most revered, I say this because the strongest combatants in One Piece ever were swordsmen. Not all of them, you know, there were some at the top, which is like Garp, for example. He had his bare hands and nothing else. Probably the strongest person with no weapon in the history of the story, and no devil fruit either. Let's look at Kaido's top 5, for example. 4 out of 5 of these guys are swordsmen. And I know Zebek might not be confirmed, but as far as we know, he may have very well been a sword fighter. You got Roger, you got Odin, you got Shanks. And beyond even Kaido's list, you have the likes of Shiki, Rayleigh, arguably Big Mom. You know, I know there's always a debate on whether or not she's a swordsman or not. And, you know, that's something I'm not sure we can class her as one myself, but I don't think it's important. And I can go on and on why she is one, but I'm gonna just leave that in particular alone for now. But the main point is we have all these sword fighters in One Piece, and depending on where Oda's going with the story, Mihawk might be even stronger than all of them. And I know you might be asking, am I suggesting that Mihawk might be stronger than Roger? And yes, absolutely I am. Of course, I'm not saying that as an absolute fact, because that is something that I am completely unsure of myself, but I am very open to the possibility for a number of reasons. One of them being the fact that I think Oda might be setting the story up for the old gen to have been surpassed by the new gen. And I don't mean just the main characters and everything, but it's very possible that Roger will surpass as the strongest swordsman. I think Oda does a lot to make the old gen look like they're on his pedestal, but at the same time, I don't think it's conclusive that they're just clear cut above everyone else to ever live. I think that was absolutely the case when they were alive, but now I think we can have scenarios in which maybe Akainu is the strongest marine of all time. Maybe Mihawk is the strongest swordsman of all time. Maybe Blackbeard is the strongest Gura user of all time. Maybe not now, but maybe later down the story. Because as far as Blackbeard goes, I know it's also very possible that he's not at his peak yet. But when he is, he may very well possibly be stronger than Prime Whitebeard. I think what Oda is laying out for us when it comes to the old gen is just a perspective of the world. You know, how the people of the One Piece world view them. Because you have things like how before the Marineford War, the perspective was that Whitebeard was still the strongest man. And, you know, most people will tell you that he was not the world's strongest man. And the evidence suggests that because it shows that illness and old age took its toll on him and he was no longer able to fight at his peak. And yet the people of the One Piece world did not realize this. And their perspective was, this man is still the strongest in the world without a shadow of a doubt. And that's because reputation goes a long way. Reputation carries these characters even in their old age, even when they're far less capable than they were in their prime. And Mihawk at Marineford was very much aware of Whitebeard's reputation, but he noticed something was off. And at the time I told myself that this is proof that Mihawk was not stronger than Whitebeard. But then once you take in the fact that Mihawk wasn't confirming that he was weaker than Whitebeard, he was confirming the perspective of the world. And in his mind, he thought something was off. You know, he thought, can this really be the world's strongest man? Because something is off about him. And that's why Mihawk went and tried to test him and see if there was this distance that Whitebeard was supposed to have between himself and the rest of the world as the world's strongest man. So if we're going to compare Whitebeard at Marineford with Mihawk at Marineford, and 10 times out of 10, Mihawk wins against that version of Whitebeard, because he just was not the man he was in his prime. And Mihawk was the first person to notice that. So once you get that whole Mihawk versus old Whitebeard angle out of the way, then you can see how high and how, seemingly boundless Mihawk's potential is. As I see the story right now, Mihawk only has to be weaker than one person, and that person is Luffy's final opponent, whoever it might be, whether it be Emu, whether it be Blackbeard, whether it be some other character that Oda hasn't introduced yet for whatever reason. And I feel like this is why Oda made Zoro a swordsman, because this allows him to have very lofty strength ambitions without overshadowing his captain. If Zoro wanted to be the world's strongest man, that would of course get in the way of Luffy wanting to be stronger than anyone. At that point, he wouldn't be the king of the Supreme Kings. He wouldn't be top one. Look at Rayleigh and Roger. They're the same exact type of fighter. They're both swordsmen. So this type of dynamic can't exist between those two, because there would be a contradiction, of course. So going back to Mihawk and what it means to be the strongest swordsman, what I feel has to be a fact is him being superior in a fight against any other swordsman. You can be a brawler and be stronger than Mihawk, and that won't change anything. But if you're a swordsman and you wield more power than Mihawk, I think that absolutely invalidates his title. Because whether you will be a devil fruit using swordsman, or maybe you're like Kinemon, who adds fire to his sword fighting, anything you add, as long as your combat style is centered around swordsmanship, Mihawk has to be stronger for the story to make sense. And usually this is centered around Mihawk versus Shanks, and I don't see any argument for Shanks being stronger. I won't say it's impossible, because it's not my story. It's Oda's story. He can introduce any element that he wants to make things make sense from his angle, because he's the author and everything. But with what he's given us so far, and what we know about Haki and swordsmanship and how Haki can be used with swordsmanship, I don't think Shanks is stronger than Mihawk. And of course, there's the whole sword skills versus sword power or power in general debate. And I feel like that's misinterpreted to, make people think that skills in swords are different from actual power, when I don't think that makes any sense, because the point of sword skills is to show how powerful you are with a sword, who you can defeat with your sword. The same way combat skills are how powerful you are combatively, how strong you are. And within the story, we see how skills is used to refer to power. There's so many things that can be defined as a skill. Using Haki is a skill. Using Haki on your sword is a skill. Using Conqueror's Haki on your sword is also a skill. So then once you go back to Shanks versus Mihawk, why wouldn't Shanks use his Haki on his sword? Or beyond that, why would Shanks have a punch stronger than his sword slashes when his sword is his preferred weapon? And that's just how I see it, though. I think when you're comparing these two, you have to look at the fight from a hypothetical standpoint and ask yourself these sort of questions and how it applies to the story, Mihawk's title, Shanks' place in the story, and everything all together. But speaking of Shanks' place in the story, I feel like the biggest reason why people have Shanks over Mihawk is because of portrayal. And, one might say that Shanks has superior portrayal. I don't think he does. I think Shanks has cooler moments, because portrayal isn't just an attack. It isn't a clash. That's not it at all. Portrayal is a combination of things. And for Shanks, if you're comparing him to Mihawk, you have to put these things into context, because what's to say that Mihawk with a crew wouldn't be able to stop the war in Marineford as well? What's to say Mihawk can't split the sky with Whitebeard? What's to say Mihawk can't block Akainu's attack? And for the Mihawk side of things, he has the world's strongest swordsman title. And that, for me, is portrayal. It's also a feat, because you can't just wake up one day and decide, hey, I'm going to be the world's strongest swordsman. He obviously earned it, and Oda has given him this title because he has superior combat ability to any swordsman in the One Piece world. And this is something that Shanks can't surpass Mihawk in unless he's just stronger than him, as long as Shanks' preferred combat style is swordsmanship. Because if he were to go to some other avenue or some other style of fighting, then he has absolutely every right to be stronger than Mihawk in my eyes. And this might be one of the hottest takes in this video so far, but I think that Mihawk would actually have stronger Conqueror's Haki than Shanks. I think for Shanks and his Conqueror's Haki, he's the most highlighted Conqueror's Haki user, but I don't think that necessarily means he's the strongest, because, for Mihawk to be stronger, I feel like his overall will has to be stronger, and Conqueror's Haki is a testament to the user's own will or their own strength. And unless Oda does it in a way where Mihawk's observation haki and armament haki is just outright superior to Shanks' Conqueror's haki, then I can see that angle from it. You know, that can make sense if that's what's being implied. But I don't think that's the case because Conqueror's haki is just outright the strongest haki. But, you know, maybe Shanks has different haki abilities, you know, inside of those, inside of armament, inside of observation, inside of Conqueror's haki. What's important is that Mihawk's culmination of abilities surpasses Shanks' culmination of abilities. And, you know, it can be something like how in film Red it was implied that Shanks has a observation haki canceling ability. Maybe Mihawk doesn't have that, but he has something superior to that or something that outdoes that. Maybe Mihawk's observation haki was so strong that Shanks could not cancel it. And that's why he's known as the clairvoyant, you know, Hawkeyes, you know, all these epithets and descriptions that describe Mihawk as potentially the strongest observation haki user in the series. But I think that's enough of the whole Mihawk versus Shanks angle because, you know, Mihawk has his own merits. He has his own things that bring his portrayal up. The thing that I think is the most impressive is that he was able to survive on the high seas with nothing but his little boat, you know, and his black blade. And the fact that he was able to do this and have a bounty as high as he does, which is currently the 3rd highest bounty in the story, 7th highest bounty of all time, as far as we know. At 3.59 billion, he has an insanely high bounty for someone the world government currently perceives as a Yonko subordinate. What's even crazier is the fact that they have his bounty higher than the man who they think this guy answers to. And, you know, some people say that it's only high because he was hunting Marines in his past, which is a pretty crazy angle to look at it, because why would somebody have a bounty this high, higher than 2 of the 4 emperors, for hunting Marines? And if he was hunting Marines, to have a bounty this high, you'd have to have defeated admirals or something. Assuming that's the main reason, you know? Because Caribou, who was doing the same thing, only had a 210 million berry bounty. So obviously this whole Marine hunting thing isn't going to boost your bounty that high. And the only thing it makes sense for is pure combat ability, because Mihawk doesn't have connections or, you know, he doesn't know secrets that would be a threat to the world government and stuff like that. He's not a poneglyph reader. He's not, you know, the user of the Nika fruit. He's just trying to live in peace at the moment. So he's no threat to the world government directly, but he still poses a threat combatively. And as far as combat goes, let's look at some of his other merits that might help to, you know, get a better picture of where he stands. Of course, as we know, he has the world's strongest swordsman title, and he has one of 3 world's strongest titles out of the story that we've seen so far. And the other holders of these titles is Kaido and Whitebeard, the world's strongest man and the world's strongest creature. He has one of the 12 supreme grade blades. The only confirmed users of these weapons so far, Whitebeard and Roger. The only living people with higher bounties than him, Blackbeard and Shanks. The weapon he possesses is the world's strongest sword, and potentially the strongest of all time, even stronger than the ones that Whitebeard and Roger wielded. He has one of only 2 confirmed black blades in history. The only other user of a black blade, or only other person who forged a black blade that we know of, is Ryuma. And Ryuma has portrayal unlike almost anyone. You know, this guy's compared to Joy Boy, who's basically a god in the One Piece world. I mean, he is known as the sun god Nika, so that just goes to show you how high the Mihawk's potential by extension might be. You know, all these figures that he has some sort of relation or connection to say a lot about who he is and how powerful he might be. So all this together should give you a good idea of how high I see Mihawk can go. Currently, I have him as the 2nd strongest in One Piece. And as I said before, I believe the only person meant to be stronger is Luffy's final opponent. And currently, if you ask me and I had to guess, I would say that's Imu himself. And I know it's kind of hard to tell if Imu's a combatant or if he just has this hacks ability that erases islands and everything. But the way that Imu's presented, I feel like he's absolutely a figure that Luffy must stop to reach his dream, especially because he's called the king of the world. How can you be the pirate king, or how can you be the king of the supreme kings if you don't defeat the biggest obstacle and the one figure that stands at the top of the world? I don't think it makes sense for Luffy to avoid him. I think they absolutely have to fight, and Luffy will earn his spot as the strongest character of all time by defeating Imu. But this isn't even a Luffy video, so, you know, I'm going to save all that talk for another video. But as far as Mihawk goes, tell me, how strong do you think he is? Where do you think he ranks in the list of the strongest characters in One Piece, alive and all time? Do you think he's stronger than Roger? Do you think he's stronger than Ryuma? Give me all your thoughts down below. And also, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more videos like this.